kids. Welcome back into Dead Man's Books. Thanks for joining us. We have been so lucky this summer and have been able to interview some great authors, and we've really met some cool people, and I've really enjoyed that part of it the most. We've really met some really cool and generous people. They've been willing to sit down with us and talk over their books, and we've got a couple more coming here in the next month or so. But today we have a really special one because the great Elizabeth Randall joined us via Zoom and talked to Jason Crockett and myself about her book, Murder in St. Augustine, The Mysterious Death of Athalia Ponsell Lindsley. If you are a regular listener of this show, if you know me personally, you know that my family, we love the city of St. Augustine. We visit it every year. And for me, I came across this true crime book and was really, I guess, enthralled by it because we walked the street that the Athalia Ponsell Lindsley house was, where she was unfortunately murdered. And we're just really stricken at how this murder was able to take place. And it's just an incredible story. There's a lot of things about small town politics. There's a lot of things about women in the society of the 1970s in the South, and things like that. You know, it's the power of the press is another one that comes up a lot in Murder in St. Augustine. So it's a really interesting story. And if you're a fan of true crime, if you're a fan of St. Augustine, if you're a fan of a good story, if you're a fan of someone seeking justice, then this is definitely a story and an interview for you. We are really thankful for Elizabeth Randall again for sitting down with us. She's written many other books, including Haunted St. Augustine in St. Johns County. She has a new book that has come out called Secret St. Augustine. She also has written a fiction book called Hating Harlan, and you can find all of these on her website at elizabethrandallauthor.com. I've got a link in the show notes. I've also got a couple links for you to purchase the books that she's written and one that is directly for this book, Murder in St. Augustine. So without keeping you waiting, here is Jason Crockett and myself sitting down when talking with Elizabeth Randall and her book, Murder in St. Augustine, The Mysterious Death of Athalia Ponsell Lindsley. We're here this week with Elizabeth Randall. She wrote the book Murder in St. Augustine, The Mysterious Death of Athalia Ponsell Lindsley. And again, thanks for being with us. We always ask this on people who are new to the show, but what is your favorite book?
My favorite book ever, well, my most recent one is by Haruki Murakami, and it was called What I Think About When I Think About Running.
Okay.
It was not fiction. It was translated from the Japanese, but it was a really, really good book. I like Richard Brautigan a lot too. Do you know who that is?
I'm not familiar with it, no.
Yeah, he was popular in the 70s, trout fishing in America and watermelon sugar. So he's still one of my favorites.
Cool.
I like Joan Didion too.
Okay. Well, you're also a fellow English teacher, or are you currently still teaching, or are you?
No, I retired in 2019, but I've taught at least 3 college classes in composition since then. So I keep up with it.
What was your favorite book to teach when you were teaching high school English?
Oh, there's so many. I liked Their Eyes Were Watching God by George. Oh, do you teach that?
Well, Jason's going to this year, right, Jason?
Yes, sir. I'm using it with my AP class this year.
Yeah, it's a great book, beautifully written with a lot. Although in the end, here, explain this to me. Didn't she get bitten as well? And wasn't she going to develop rabies as well?
I think she almost got bitten, right? TK kind of come in there and saved the day at the last minute, if I'm remembering correctly.
Well, yeah, he got bitten,
Yeah.
but I thought she got bitten too. But anyway, one of my favorite books. I also used to teach every year. I don't, they're probably banned now, but 1984 and Brave New World.
Okay.
I always taught those.
I love 1984, but I've not read Brave New World yet. We have a used bookstore here in Tennessee called McKay's, and I went there to the one in Nashville last week on Thursday, and I had a Brave New World in my hands, and I actually traded it in for another Zora Neale Hurston book. So I had
Which
to,
one?
I got two. I got, what is it? Jonah's New Gourd or something like that. And I really can't remember the other one that I bought. I just saw them together and I loved Their Eyes Were Watching God so much. I just grabbed both of them without even thinking about it. So have you been to Eatonville? That's kind of close to where you're at, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I've been, of course. Yeah.
What is it like there? We go to Florida every year for vacation, but we don't venture that far south. So I didn't know how is Eatonville?
I have a lot of admiration for Eatonville because, like with most Black communities, developers tried to build a road right through the town,
Mm.
and they fought back
Oh,
and
that's cool.
preserved their heritage. I go to Eatonville about once a year for the Zora Neale Hurston Festival. Uh,
Wow.
did you know they had that
I didn't know that they had that. No.
in February?
Oh, okay.
And you know, they celebrate her and have T-shirts and speakers and stuff like that. And she never really lived there. She stayed with friends.
Hmm.
So they show a few houses that she stayed at, but she really didn't live anywhere. She was an adventurer and a traveler. I mean, I talked to one lady who used to go over to her houseboat to listen to her stories in Daytona. She lived on a houseboat for a long time. Well, not she didn't live anywhere for a long time. So she liked to keep moving.
I know I'm kind of off topic, but I'm really interested in the play that she and Langston Hughes wrote together. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they started writing this play together, and then she, I think, ended up taking it to a film company early, and he didn't want that, and that their friendship ended up falling out over it. So, and they reproduced the play. It's not complete. So Langston Hughes is probably my favorite poet. That's why I brought that up. But I love
I love
Zora Neale Hurston. So
what's the name of the play?
I can't think of it off the top of my head. I could probably Google search it really quick. I've got my computer right here. Yeah, Langston Hughes got really upset with her.
Oh, it didn't take much. He had a huge ego too. So, and she was never really into the Harlem Renaissance.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was not really. She said she wasn't a part of it.
Oh, really?
Hmm.
That's interesting because a lot of the stuff that I've seen has considered her a part of that. So that's really
Oh,
interesting.
she was very independent. So,
Hmm.
I don't believe she considered herself a part of it, although her work certainly lends itself to that account.
This says that the name of the play was called The Mule Bone.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, she had a lot of mules in her story.
I know. I'm pretty sure that the book that I got, the other book that I got at McKay's is something about a mule. It's got mule in the title. So that's interesting.
Whole chapter, and their eyes were watching God.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, that's really cool. Or Jason, do you have anything else before?
Well, since we were just on the topic of Zora Neale Hurston, can I beg one question? Some of my AP students are within listening distance right now, and this is going to be their first semester getting to read anything by Zora Neale Hurston. As a former teacher of Zora Neale Hurston, what would you hope kids most get out of a semester with her book, Their Eyes Were Watching God?
Well, of course, the symbolism, but also the history of Eatonville, which is a very important spot in Black history because, or any history, because it was totally run by African Americans and it was independent of any real white influence or government, so to speak. So I would hope they would understand that that was, really unique for that period of time and, quite an outstanding accomplishment. I I just love the characterization in the book too. I mean, all of the characters were so real and vital. You either loved them or you hated them. And, of course, some of the stuff she did, tea cake, we all love tea cake, but he was really kind of a questionable character, but it kind of shows, how love can, conquer all, so to speak, even, a rabid dog bite. So, but one thing I would recommend, have you ever heard of her short story, Sweat?
I haven't. No.
Oh, that's a good way to introduce Zora Neale Hurston. Um, it's, I'm sure you can find it online, and it's a really good short story, and I think scary, but
Mm.
I think a lot of the AP instructors here in Seminole County would start off with Sweat.
Okay, cool. I'll look into that.
It's actually on Common Lit, Crockett, by the way.
Ah, perfect.
So there are 3 Zora Neale Hurstons on Common Lit, just FYI. So cool.
I'm so glad you're teaching her because I was really afraid she might, I heard the book was banned. So
Yeah.
in Florida it is.
Yeah. I don't know about all other school districts in Tennessee, but I've only been a teacher for 18 years, and I feel like in the last 18 years, I've really not experienced a lot of pushback from anything that I've assigned. It's always just felt very occasional, but this is the first year. 2025 is the first year I've really felt much more pushback on, well, we're not comfortable with our kid reading that. So I do think it's starting to sink in here.
Ugh, that's very distressing.
Yeah.
Because yeah. Well, I'm sure there's still a lot of good books out there, though.
Sure. I think I also share your attitude toward it of, if you would just give me a chance to share this book with you and read and have conversations, I think you really would love it. I think you really would love people if we could just meet them where they are and talk about them.
I agree. That's a great point of view.
I guess we can move on to the book, which again, I'll put it here for the camera. I've got the book right here. I got really excited too because I was in, oh my gosh, what's the name of the store? Uptown Collective when I was in St. Augustine this past summer, and I saw it in there, and I was like, hey, I've got that book. So that was really cool. I guess I wanted to start off with, you talk about at the beginning of the book, the case of your father. I didn't know if this book, I didn't know how much that inspired you to look into Athalia Ponsell's murder, or did it help to bring attention to your father's case? I didn't know if you had any thing to say about that.
Well, nothing really has brought attention to my father's case. It's still an unsolved murder that I reopen every once in a while, because we have a pretty good idea of who did it, but we don't have any evidence. So, and which was the same thing. That's what drew me to Athalia Ponsell Lindsley's case too, which, by the way, is pretty famous in Augustine. Well, I first wrote the book, Haunted St. Augustine and St. Johns County. And there was one chapter in it about the Athalia Ponsell Lindsley case. And when I would do book talks, that was what mostly what people wanted to talk about. So when Haunted St. Augustine and St. Johns County was released, it didn't do very well at first because History Press had released like 1 million haunted books about St. Augustine. And my book is mostly history. In fact, if you look at the reviews for Haunted St. Augustine and St. Johns County, people complain that it's history, not enough ghosts. And, I use the ghosts as a way to introduce the history. In fact, my husband and I just finished Haunted Florida Keys, and we do the same thing there. We use the ghost stories to introduce the history. So when I would do my book talks, people wanted to talk about Athalia Ponsell Lindsley. So I wrote to my editors. I said, look, this sounds like a good book. And they're like, well, your last one didn't sell very well. And I'm like, well, that's because you released 1 million St. Augustine books. And they said, well, that's right. Okay, well, go ahead and do it. And the book was fascinating to write, the research. I was teaching full time at the at the time. During the summer, my husband and I did all the research. We flew to Northampton, Massachusetts to look at Francis Bemis's files. We flew to Charleston, South Carolina to look at some of the backstory about Patty Stanford's will and what happened with that. And we got I read through all the depositions and the interviews and the transcripts, and then I wrote it during the school year, on weekends and at night. And it was pretty successful right away. It's been on the Amazon bestseller list a few times, and Haunted St. Augustine and St. Johns County has turned out to be one of my best-selling books too.
Oh, good. Congratulations. I think that I have seen that. I know I mentioned in the notes that I sent you, I always go to Secondhand Bookstore. I don't know if you're familiar with that in St. Augustine. It's right there by Flagler College. And I want to think that I have seen that book in there before. But
yeah,
it's like you said, there are so many ghost books
Mhm.
set in St. Augustine.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
they ghosts.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So when you were doing your research, did you do it all and then write, or did you kind of write and then take notes? I need to go back and look at this. How did you go about that research process? I know you were just talking about flying in the summer, but did you try to get as much as you could at once and then go to the manuscript, or did you just write and then try to research as you went?
You sound like you're an author, are you?
uh, I would not say so. I've written a few journalistic articles, but as far as writing a book, I've not. So,
Okay. Well, I wrote the bulk of my books while I was working full time.
okay.
And you know how demanding teaching is, especially in English, where you read a lot of writing, and that takes up a lot of time, especially in my day. They mostly hand wrote stuff, which I hope they don't do anymore because it was very hard to read. So what I would do, since mostly I started out with nonfiction, is I would use the summers to do all my research. And I'd be like thinking in my mind how to organize the book, because that's like the biggest part of it. And so, I'd have that in my mind and I'd jot down a few phrases, and I always interviewed people, so I had all those notes. But I really didn't start writing till all my research was done. And that's pretty much true of most of my nonfiction books. I have two fiction books, and I find writing fiction much harder than writing nonfiction, maybe because my father and my grandfather were journalists, and I saw their process. So, but mostly I do all the research, then I write.
Jason and I have talked about writing stuff this summer, and just for each other to kind of look at, and I've tried to write some fiction this summer, and I'm like you, I've started and gotten so stuck, and I thought the other day, I was thinking, if this was research nonfiction, I think I could knock this out really quick, but I think it's like you said, that journalistic background.
Journalists, yeah. I have have you ever heard of Laura Lee Smith? She wrote The Ice House and Heart of Palm. She won the Florida Book Award.
No, I've not heard of her.
She's great. I really recommend her. And I also recommend her to for teaching if you want, a Florida background.
Oh, okay.
Because her books were set in Jacksonville and St. Augustine, I think. And she said that she finds writing nonfiction really hard and fiction easy. So I think it depends on your background, your inclinations.
How do you outline? Do you kind of just, like I said, keep brief notes, or do you have like an extensive outline? I know that we talked to Troy Smith, who's a professor here at the college close to us at Tennessee Tech, and he said that when he did it, he usually would do like, I want this to happen in this chapter and this to happen in this chapter. So he basically outlined each chapter, but I didn't know kind of what your process was as far as outlining or pre-writing or anything like that.
But does he write fiction or nonfiction?
Mostly fiction, wouldn't you say, Jason? But he does write a lot of nonfiction as well.
Yeah, a lot of Western fiction and historical fiction, but the other half of it definitely is with his nonfiction related to the coursework that he studies and teaches.
I don't do a formal outline, but I usually have a pretty good idea of where I'm going when I get started. And if it's nonfiction, of course, the research shapes the book. Um, but what for fiction, I write a summary of what I want to happen in the book to the characters. Um, and at certain point, I don't do it chapter by chapter, but at certain points in the book, plot points, I kind of write what I think should happen. But often, the book turns out to be different because, as you know, writing is an organic process and it can change. And sometimes, in fiction, the characters kind of take over. So, but in nonfiction, I really let the research shape the outcome of the book. With Murder in St. Augustine, I began writing that book because I felt, in fact, the whole theme of that book, which I tried to bring out throughout the book, was the injustice. Because even in my book talks, people would come in and say horrible things about her, who lived during that time. And because a lot of people still remember that case and remember her. And they were young, but they still remember. And, the town basically said that she deserved what she got. Mm-hmm. And the trial was held in St. Augustine, where there was a huge bias toward her alleged murderer. And so I was like, that is ridiculous. And then I related it to my father's case, which basically was ignored initially by the police. They made no effort whatever to solve it. I don't think anyone was deposed except maybe my brother-in-law. And that was just like a handwritten thing on yellow legal paper. So, I've always had a strong sense of injustice about unsolved murders. And I feel the only justice that can result from an unsolved murder is to remember the victims. And so that is what motivated me with Athalia. And that's why I made sure I included, positive things about her as well as the negative. There was so much negative. She was a woman who was born ahead of her time. Even nowadays, people would, pick on women who are assertive and opinionated. But in the 70s, it made her kind of an outcast in St. Augustine, which is a deeply Southern, even today, traditional type of town.
For any of our listeners who are not familiar with the book, what would you say is Athalia's truly positive characteristic, but also what makes her so provocative? What would be the negative that you think people are so focused on about her?
Well, the positive are that she was a successful career woman, in New York City at a time when that was very rare. Of course, she was a model, but she branched out, in Broadway plays, television, commercials. I mean, she was really very successful. And so she had a lot of confidence. Also, her mother was a political activist and a teacher and a writer. And, she got all that from her. I think I would have liked her. But in a deeply Southern town like St. Augustine, she was an anomaly. And they really had nothing good to say about her ever. And they were very unfair. During the time her mother was dying, she took care of her mother. Her mother was an invalid for years. Her sister lived in Hawaii, so it was up to her. She took care of her mother for years, to the point where she was carrying her to the bathroom. I mean, her mother and never was hospitalized for that. And during this time, her neighbors were persecuting her, dragging her to court because of her barking dogs, which I have to question that a little, because if her mother was an invalid, and they were that noisy. I mean, wouldn't that have disturbed Margarita? So I think that she was just an anomaly. They made fun of her because she was 50 years ahead of her time.
Yeah.
So,
I was listening to a podcast episode about this on the way in to refresh myself today, and it opens by talking about the quote that well-behaved women rarely make history, that history rarely looks back favorably upon them. And it still in 2025 seems to be the case. And it just stymies me that anybody, male or female, can look at what I know of her and be so upset when she seems to have been doing so well in Jacksonville, and she's doing
and
so well with her mother.
yeah,
And then she comes to this community and instantly we're going to start being petty about it. We're going to start being like, we did not even make an effort to find any commonality or anything that we like about this person. Didn't even give her a chance.
no, they didn't. Well, that's even today. I have friends in St. Augustine who've lived there all their lives, and they're lovely, lovely people, but they don't like all the change in St. Augustine. They wish it was still the way it was. So
I think I know I put that in the question. I think we can kind of relate to that to an extent. I know that I put in the notes that we have had a lot of people move into our small town and things have changed a little bit. And I was actually on a jog this past summer when we stayed, and there was a sign in a front yard that said no rental houses. This is a neighborhood. And I was like, man, I felt bad because I felt like I was intruding on them. But yeah, I guess I saw that for the first time firsthand this past summer. Do you care to give us just a little, I guess, retelling of, we've talked about Athalia's background, but how did we get to the murder? Do you care to give us like a little background on that?
well, Athalia was born in Cuba, which was in an American territory called the Isle of Pines. Today it's called the Isle of Youth. And her mother lobbied the U.S. government not to give it back to Cuba, but failed. So they moved to Jacksonville. And she finished high school there, although I think she and her sister went to school at some point in St. Augustine at St. Joseph's, which is still there. And so I think that was her connection to St. Augustine. And so when she was 18, she got married to this guy, Tom Hyman, who wrote a book called It's the Law. And it was a book about all the little weird, anomalies in the law. And it was actually kind of a bestseller, I think. And I have a picture of her and him in Las Vegas on their honeymoon. And he's pinning a sheriff's badge on her or something, and that marriage only lasted a year or two. He was a lot older than her, I think.
Okay.
He was 18. He was in his 30s, I think. So after that, her dad died, and she moved to New York City with her sister. And I have a picture of where she lived. It looks like a old bunch of townhouses converted into apartments. And she lived with people from all over the world. Now, Athalia, I'm sorry to say, was no integrationist, but she did know how to live with different kinds of people, which is not true of everyone else in St. Augustine in that period of time. So she was a lot more tolerant than, say, people in St. Augustine would be, and more open to new ideas and new philosophies and so forth. So she did really well in New York City. She was briefly engaged to Joseph Kennedy, who died in the war. She was engaged to big shots in New York City, but nothing really worked out. She was on a television show. She was in a Broadway play, lots of commercials. She was a Powers model. And then in her 30s, they called her washed up. But really, I think what happened was her mom got sick and she went back to take care of her because her sister was in Hawaii. So when she moved back to Jacksonville, she got married again to a real estate guy. She had some stepchildren, but the marriage didn't work out, and she didn't keep in touch with any of them. After that, I don't know why she decided to leave Jacksonville. She and her mom lived in this mansion in Riverside, I think it was. And maybe it was too expensive to keep up. Who knows? But they sold it and moved to Marine Street, a very exclusive, nice neighborhood in St. Augustine. And, ran into problems right away with her neighbors. They made fun of her for tending her garden in a pink wrapper. They objected to her. They said she had a dozen dogs and some goats and all this other stuff. She had her dogs and her mother's dogs. I don't know about the goat. I never heard any evidence of the goat. And again, they complained about the barking. But I know that Alan Stanford had a dog that he just let run loose. And I remember Frances Bemis, there's documentation that she complained about that. And he told her to mind her own business. So they dragged her to court over the noise disturbance during a time when her mother was dying. They never offered any consideration or consolation for that. They just seemed bound and determined to see the worst in her. So she was not happy about all this. So she started she had political ambitions too. And that's probably another reason she moved to St. Augustine, because she thought with the smaller government, it would be easier to get a foothold than in Jacksonville. So she started going to commission meetings. I have all those CDs on the commission meetings she appeared at. And she started targeting Alan Stanford, and with good reason, because Alan Stanford was not qualified for his position, and he was receiving twice as much money as anyone who had worked there, their whole life. And plus, he stunk at his job. He really did. Mm-hmm. And she kept bringing this up, and all the ways he had failed and how he wasn't qualified. He didn't have the right degree. He had a degree in marine engineering, and he needed a degree in civil engineering. So he was supposed to take the test as a condition of his employment for the civil engineer, and he flunked it. So they said, well, you can take it again. So he was studying to take it again at the time of her death. But meanwhile, she had written, forget the name of the board. It was the Board of Professional Organizations or something. And they showed up on the day she died in Stanford's office saying that he had violated Florida statutes by signing his name as a civil engineer on official papers when he wasn't. And so he's like, I'm going to lose my job over this. And also he had threatened her life. She had brought this up in a commission meeting, which he said was a lie, but I don't believe that. So he got home that day, and there's so many conflicting accounts about the timeline, but everyone agrees he came home, had 2 stiff drinks. His wife, had very conflicting testimony in her deposition about what time he got home, what time dinner was served, what he did then, where he went, and so forth. But Athalia was murdered with a machete on her front step around 6:00. The Stanfords said that Alan wasn't even home. After dinner, he left and went back to the office. And so he's just being persecuted. So that was it. And then things went on from there. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, for sure. That was awesome. Thank you. Well, I know my wife and I, like I've said, we've been going to St. Augustine now for, I think, 8 years. And we have walked Marine Street quite a bit. And I actually just found out about the Athalia Lindsley murder when I found your book. And so I had no clue. And we had walked past her house, and, we went by the cemetery, the military cemetery there and all of that. And so this past summer, I guess we did like a field trip, like Crockett and I did with the one book we read. We were walking down Marine Street, and we came to her house, and we were just so shocked how this could have happened right there, like you said, on her front step. And I know that you talk about in the book that it was a busy street, but I feel like today it's not that busy. It's so quiet, but it's still very intimate, which would have been the same in the 70s. I don't know. I know that there was I think, was it the son of one of the neighbors who said that he had seen Alan Stanford over there. But I was just so surprised that there was only really one eyewitness to the murder. I mean, what are your feelings about Marine Street and all of this taking place in such like I said, an intimate setting?
Well, in the past, I don't know how, I think 8 years ago, you could still see Matanza Bay from Marine Street. All those fancy houses on the other side hadn't been built yet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, but it was in broad daylight, and it was right there on her front porch.
Mm.
And of course, the Stanfords heard it. I mean, Patty Stanford and Patricia Stanford heard the screams. And so did Locke McCormick, the eyewitness in the house on the other side. And he went out and he saw the back of a man with graying hair and a white dress shirt and black trousers hitting, he said, Miss Ponsell. And he never saw his face, but then he saw him head off in the direction of the Stanford house. He was trailing blood. There was blood, and it was on the wall and everywhere. So I really believe that Patty and maybe Patricia Stanford both saw him in their backyard afterward, covered in blood. And he went around to where his car was parked, which was on the side, and there's blood found around the car. And he took some laundry. They kept their dirty laundry in a little shed near where he parked the car. And he took the dirty laundry, I think, to clean up and wipe off the blood. And then he went to his office. They found blood there too, I think, and changed, and then dumped everything else in the garbage dump on Ribaldi. And but as far as nobody hearing, I'm not so surprised at that. That's happened in at least 2 other murders I've investigated. Have you ever heard of the Xbox murder?
I haven't. Have you, Jason?
Okay, this was a case in Deltona, Volusia County, where 6 guys with baseball bats burst into this house of people they didn't like and killed them all.
Wow.
And this happened, it happened at night, but it wasn't really late. And I wrote about it, and I talked to the neighbors, and they said they never heard anything. Same thing with my father. My father was shot through the kitchen window in in Winter Park Pines suburb. And afterward, I went around to all the neighbors. Nobody heard any. Well, one neighbor said she heard someone pounding on his door, but she didn't hear any gunshots. So people either don't want to get involved, or they're watching TV, or they're in the shower, or there's all kinds of reasons. But a lot of times nobody comes, nobody hears, or if they do, they don't care.
Yeah. I think too, you mentioned a lot how it was such a busy street at the time because the hospital was at the end of the street. I think that's moved now, right? I want to think that a resort is at the end of the street. I might be wrong, but
yeah, you're right. It's not as busy anymore. Mm-hmm. But Patty Stanford made a point of saying how busy the street was.
Yeah.
At that time, she said there are always strangers walking, in the hospital. There's so many cars, and a lot of cars actually went by. I put that in the book, after she was killed. And, they said they thought someone had fallen out of a window.
Wow.
Because of blood.
It's just so bizarre to me, that we just kept talking about that. We walked there, and then we walked onto St. George Street on that end of town because we had reservations at Columbia Restaurant, which is delicious. But we were walking back to Columbia, and that's just all we kept talking about is how did someone else not see this, because she had read through the book when we had gotten into town, and we were talking about how it was supposed to be so busy. And I don't know, it's just so bizarre to me that we've really only got one person that he was at one time willing to say that he saw, right? But then he changed his statement. So
I heard from a friend of his that his parents made him change his testimony because they were afraid for him, and they did not want him to be targeted. And that's because, of course, it was Alan. Who else would it be? They tried to throw Dewey Lee under the bus, but he never wore a dress shirt or dress pants. He was a mechanic. So anyway, I feel like in the book I proved it was Alan because I pointed out all the inconsistencies. But as far as nobody hearing or seeing, Locke McCormick's did, and the Stanfords heard and I think saw and knew that Alan was guilty or suspected.
We've been fortunate enough to talk to several writers, Dr. Troy Smith, Mr. Walker a couple of weeks ago. And as English teachers, I know that we all tend to look at like what's the bigger story that connects between all the things that we teach, the patterns that we see outside the classroom. I always tell my students, nobody cares that you read Beowulf after high school. It's what do you learn about us? What do you learn about yourself? What does Beowulf say about, the circumstances we live in now? So one of the questions that I hope we continue to ask our celebrated authors that we get to talk to, what would you say makes this such a Southern story, or what makes this so connected to our experience?
Again, I feel that Athalia did not receive justice because she was a woman who was ahead of her time, and people resented and intensely disliked her, because she spoke up. She didn't, like I said in the introduction, she wasn't the type of person to sit down, shut up, and smile. So I hope that wouldn't lead students. I've actually taught this book in Nassau County. It was picked as an author's in the school. So I hope that wouldn't lead people to think that women shouldn't speak up or they're going to get killed. In the introduction, I do talk about how, some states have higher murder rates of women than others. Florida and South Carolina were pretty high. I talk about how women are often killed by someone they know. Well, most people are killed by someone they know. It's usually not a stranger. That's rarer. So I would hope that it would be a lesson in justice for women, justice for unsolved murder victims, because the only way they get justice is when people remember them. And also the history of St. Augustine, which, again, they were a Southern town. They were occupied by the Union Army during the Civil War. They didn't like that. They were really crucial to getting the Civil Rights Act passed. The civil rights history in St. Augustine, which I brought out a bit in the book, is something I would definitely teach. And I did teach because Martin Luther King came there. They had the Ku Klux Klan beat up a St. Augustine dentist who was the center of the, civil rights demonstrations. I mean, the injustice is unbelievable. And of course, Athalia wouldn't have been part of that because that wasn't who she was. But Francis Bemis marched with the Black citizens for civil rights. And not many white people in that town did, but some did. And Francis Bemis was one. And the civil rights history, I think, is really important to understanding St. Augustine, because they they were against it. They thought they needed more time, to get used to these changes, and time rushed on ahead of them, and it was a tough adjustment for them. So civil rights history, justice denied, women's rights, those are the things I would focus on, and I did focus on when I taught it.
That's a really good perspective. I am just constantly reminded, like, as a senior English teacher, we teach Macbeth, and one of the most popular characters is Lady Macbeth, but she's one of only two women that appear in the play. And over, Shakespeare almost only ever gives you 1 to 2 women. And it's so easy for the kids to hate. I mean, they love her as a villain, but they hate Lady Macbeth, and they can go on and on about how wicked and vile she is. And it's like, okay, yeah, but this story was written by a man to please a largely male audience. What if we gave this story to be written by women? Does Lady Macbeth still get demonized? And there's one layer of me that says, no, of course not. She would be heroized. But what if I gave the play to Patty Stanford and said, here, now you write Lady Macbeth? And it always stymies me how quickly it's not just a male versus female thing, but how quickly some women will immediately demonize other women. Or how dare she want to move here and start, running for local office? Is she some uppity Lady Macbeth? Like, how dare she? And then start blaming her for dogs and how she do this. It always shocks me. So I think that's a really good parallel that I want to bring up to my students.
That's really interesting, because I want to point out Athalia was not evil. She loved animals, for one thing. That's why she had all the dogs, and she had a little bird that she was helping. So I think I would have liked her. I think most women of the 21st century would have liked her, but apparently in her time period, no one did.
But you also said that she was more well-liked, or she did better in Jacksonville, correct?
They loved her in Jacksonville.
Right.
Yeah, she used to go target practice with the police. She was a good shot. And she was a conservative. She was part of the Republican Party. And she was actually very conservative.
Right.
But in some ways, not. So,
yeah.
But, yeah, that's a very interesting point. And, what you said about only 2 women in Shakespeare's plays, that's also true today in today's movie industry. Mm-hmm. There's 1 or 2 token women, and it's most male casts. So
that also has been an uphill conversation, I think, especially as a male teacher in a classroom, to have with students of, is this text inherently sexist or not? And a lot of kids don't want to have the conversation, period. But a lot of other kids just instantly want to jump onto an answer and say, well, yes, it is, or no, it's not. That's ridiculous. Well, what if we look at this scene where 2 women are talking? Mr. Crockett, it's 2 women. It's not sexist. Well, let's evaluate what they're talking about. How are they depicted? What kind of voice are they given or denied? But it's just an uphill conversation, I feel like, for us to have. And it reminds me of a time when I was talking about a woman in political office and whether people were interested in voting for her or not. And a friend of mine, a woman who teaches across the hall, came to talk to my honors class about it. And she said, well, I will tell you, as a woman, I cannot stand her, blah, blah. And it just kind of surprised me. Why are so many of our objections rooted, I don't know, in other attitudes that just seem completely unfair? Where's the justice or injustice of that? Are we looking at the person, or are we looking at some sort of bias?
So you're saying women often will go up against other women for the same reasons men do.
Right.
And my husband agrees with you.
Right.
Saying that stuff like that. And I think it's true at least part of the time, not always.
Right.
Well, isn't that kind of how the conflict started with Athalia and the Stanfords? Is it was really Athalia and Patty, right? It seems like
and Rosemary,
Rosemary, yes, they had the issue with Athalia, but she took her fight with the with their husbands.
That always, I'm glad you brought that up because I always kind of wondered about that. She immediately pivoted to their husband. She tried to get Rosemary's husband as well,
Yeah.
and she wrote a letter or something, and she really got to Alan, obviously.
Yeah.
um, and I often wondered why she did that, and the only thing I can think of is that she was so powerful, and she thought, there was nothing to go after with the women. They were both housewives, so what could she say about them? They were just housewives, going about their daily tasks. They weren't involved in the community or politics or anything like that, but their husbands were. So I imagine, and also maybe she identified more with powerful men. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. She married the former mayor,
Mm.
so
I wonder, that's kind of what I'm thinking, is she maybe saw that the best place to get back at them would be at their husbands' positions, especially.
yeah.
I think Alan Stanford's was more political. Rosemary's husband, he was kind of in charge of the National Guard there,
Mhm.
correct? So,
Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know. I also feel, I don't know, how do you feel? When I read the book and read about Rosemary's husband, he kind of just brushed it off like, that, whatever, but it really got under Alan Stanford's skin.
Well, he wasn't home much. He was always away. I was always wondering what all these business trips were about with him because he was rarely home. But Alan was, very much a part of the community. He was an usher at Trinity Episcopal. He had that county manager job, and he was just very visible and really kind of beloved by the community. So he had two faces, that's for sure.
I'm going to say this because it's in my head. Well, you were talking about the civil rights in St. Augustine. My wife and I noticed this year that I can't think of it. Crockett, you might have to help me out. The lunch counter protests. There was a sit-in at what was the place here in Nashville called? I can't.
Walgreens, wasn't it?
It was the same. The lunch counter sit-in happened in St. Augustine at the same establishment that they happened in
Or
Nashville.
Woolworth? Was it
Woolworths, yes, that's it.
Woolworth.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I guess we kind of felt a connection with our Tennessee state history to St. Augustine because we were like, hey, the Woolworths, because that's such a legendary story here in Tennessee, the lunch counter sit-ins in Nashville, so I thought that was really cool. I know that that's off topic, but
Well, you know that four St. Augustine teenagers were sent to a federal prison because they wouldn't commit to stopping trying to get a hot dog at Woolworths. So that was a terrible crime. One of them spent 6 months in Dozer. Have you ever heard of Dozer? It isn't. It's a notorious Mariana facility for boys. Uh, One of the boys from there was just executed the other day. Um, Graves all over the place. They were torturing and killing the kids. So two of the boys from the St. Augustine Four went there, and the girls went to some other federal facility until I think it was Jackie Robinson got them out. So
that's interesting. Wow.
yeah, he saved them.
Do, is the Allen Stanford house, is it still standing? Because we tried to find it. I know you have a photo of it in your book, but I noticed that you had put credit to, I believe, the St. Augustine Library. So I didn't know if it had fallen from a hurricane or something like that because we couldn't find it.
Well, if I don't know if frankly, I don't know if they tore it down. I mean, there's a house there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's the same house or they tore it down and rebuilt. They do that in a lot of these ritzy communities. Uh, of course, Athalia's house looks almost the same.
It
Ever.
does, yeah. It was kind of eerie, to be honest with you. No, knowing, I mean, like I said, we've walked past that so many times and we're so oblivious to it, but walking past it that time, it was very eerie.
Yeah, but the house where Stanford lives, there's a house there. I'm not sure if it's the same one or it's been remodeled or torn down, but there's a house there. They've rebuilt that whole
Hmm.
street overbuilt that whole. You don't even have a view of the bay
Yeah.
anymore.
See, I had no clue that those houses there were not there. So that's really interesting. Which I saw they were raising the seawall, so they're going to tear some of those down here shortly, I think. So
Yeah.
did Alan Stanford? I thought that he had disposed of the murder weapon and the watch, and was it? I thought it was in the lake. Am I incorrect on that? That's
Well, it was in a lake that was doubling as a dump.
okay.
Tribaldi Street. I'm trying to. Was it Lake?
I was thinking it was that lake that's just.
It was a river.
Okay.
Yeah, river.
I thought that it was the lake. Do you know which one I'm talking about? It's just right behind their house, right there. I was thinking that was it. It's just like a small. I don't know the name of it. We may be talking about the same thing. So
we are. There was one lake they drained because they thought the murder weapon might be in there, but it wasn't. But it was found in a river, which was also part of a dump down Ribaldi Street. If you went to the very end, it was a dump.
Okay.
But I forget the name of the river, though.
The lake I'm thinking of is called Maria Sanchez Lake.
Yeah, they drained the lake and found nothing. It was found, Dewey Lee found it. And there's always been a lot of controversy about that. They said the police planted it because Dewey Lee was an informant for Eddie Lightsey, who was in charge of the case for St. John's sheriffs. And they may have told him places to look, but to me, if I was looking for evidence, I mean, Ribaldi Street was not far from Marine Street. It wasn't that far. And he could have easily, knowing the dump was there, have gone down there and dumped all the stuff. You know what I always thought was bizarre, though? They found his shoes with the other evidence, the watch and the shirt and the machete, the murder weapon. And no one checked to see, and he had taken the dirty clothes to change into so he wouldn't come back with blood on his clothes. But if anyone had looked down when he got back the night of the murder, I'm positive he was in his stocking feet.
Oh, wow.
And if anyone had looked down, they would have seen that. But I don't think anyone noticed. So
what do you make of the comment? This just popped in my head. What do you think of the comment he made when he pulls back into his house and they tell him there's been a murder and he says, was she shot or was she cut? And they were kind of like, why are you asking that? So
it was kind of like the OJ conversation. Remember, he said something similar when he heard about his wife's death. I think she said almost the same thing. So, yeah, that was very suspicious. Everything about it was, I mean, you talk to anyone in St. Augustine today who is familiar with the case, and a lot of people are, and I've been invited back there countless times to talk about it. They'll say they know who did it.
Yeah.
There's really no doubt.
Yeah.
They tried to say it was some Oriental guy with bushy hair, or it was Dewey Lee, or it was, I don't know who else. Oh, Jinx. They suspected Jinx.
Yeah.
And it was physically impossible for it to be Jinx, considering the time element. So everyone knows who did it.
Yeah. Well, that's what I put in the notes I sent over to you. One thing I really like about true crime is it's either really great police work or really bad police work. And when I was starting to read the book, you had mentioned how they had sprayed down the crime scene. They had washed the blood off and they were walking through it and stuff like that. And so immediately I thought, okay, this is going to be a case of really bad police work. However, though, you had mentioned how the St. Augustine police had said, we've never really dealt with something like this. We have the occasional bar shooting or bar fight, and we can solve that one pretty quickly, but nothing cold-blooded like this. And I kind of felt like that they did a really good job. What was your opinion on their police work?
Yeah, spraying down the blood was...
Yeah.
In fact, I had a guy call me up and tell me that it was his father who had sprayed down the blood. And a police officer told him to do it.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, that's very suspicious because, of course, there were some. And remember, Jinx called his lawyer before he went back over there. So that was all very suspicious toward Jinx, but Jinx couldn't have done it.
Yeah.
The time element is impossible. So Sheriff Garrett, Dudley Garrett, I think did an outstanding job. I went through everything. They interviewed everyone in the vicinity, everyone, passersby, neighbors, suspects, everyone you can think of. They deposed people, more than once, some of them, all the police officers. I mean, you can see all the inconsistencies in the depositions. Also, I don't think the prosecuting attorneys were to blame either, except maybe in one or two instances, they were a little overconfident. But no, the police work was exceptional. And when Frances Bemis, Athalia's neighbor, was murdered, they didn't make the same mistakes. I mean, with Athalia, they didn't, they kept the crime scene intact. They didn't, nobody was, I mean, at the Athalia crime scene, everyone's walking around, they were destroying all kinds of forensic evidence. And the same thing was true with my father's murder. He was shot through the kitchen window and they tried to break down the door and they couldn't. So they crawled through the window to get in and destroyed all the forensic evidence. Not that they tried. In Athalia's case, at least they tried hard to solve the murder. In my father's case, nobody tried at all. Nobody did anything, really, which still infuriates me. So I don't blame the police. I think Sheriff Garrett, when Allen was acquitted, Sheriff Garrett closed the case, which is unusual in an unsolved murder. He closed the case because he said, we know who did it, more or less. And there's no point in dragging an innocent person in for this. So,
do you think that if this murder would have happened, I guess, in more of a modern crime era, that it may have been solved with better evidence? I'm thinking about when they found the machete and they did the blood testing on it and they couldn't really determine the type because the water had diluted it so much. And I was thinking when I was reading that, is this a situation where if maybe we had more modern forensics that this may have been solved?
Oh, I think so. Also, they found blonde hairs on the machete.
Yeah.
So, along with his watch and shirt, which they proved through receipts that Patty had bought for him. And after the trial, he asked for his watch back. While during the trial, he claimed it wasn't his. So anyway, yeah. Also, change of venue might have helped.
Yeah.
The judge was actually from Palatka. And I talked to a guy who knew him, and he said he would come in every day and talk to him about the trial. So the judge was, I don't know why they didn't change the venue. I think maybe that was the prosecuting attorney's fault. They just thought the evidence was so overwhelming they didn't need to. And they didn't take into consideration the location and how prejudiced it was.
Yeah. Jason, do you have anything?
No, I'm just really interested. I mean, I don't want to rush back to the classroom, but I'm really interested in what I'm going to do with the classroom this fall, because I'm thinking about research projects and how we always have such an uphill battle with getting kids interested in a research topic. But when you can present them with an angle like this and say, like something seemingly mundane, that here's something that happened in this community, still brings out so much interest, investigation. It makes me eager to share stuff like this with our classroom.
That sounds great. And I know I was just thinking of a writer I used to love. I can't remember her name. Bailey was either her first or her last name. She was a first grade teacher, and she wrote short stories. And to get her little kids interested in research, every year they would do a reenactment of the Titanic. And And they got totally into it and they researched everything and, had a little, reenactment of it. And I saw her at the Miami Book Fair one year and I said, were you upset when the movie Titanic came out of her production? And she said, yes, it was very distressing because we did a better job.
Yeah.
Okay, so the case starts, and Alan Stanford's really the only person that they had listed as a suspect. I felt, if I remember correctly, right, the police. And so they take him to trial. And this is something we talked about, journalistic backgrounds. I was really interested in this because I felt like St. Augustine Record, I feel like we're not very objective as far as this case goes. So I it was just really interesting to me the things that they were publishing. It was so egregious, I'm thinking about I think there was the picture where he was smiling, and they were like, this is not right.
I love that when he's like, it was his birthday and they're congratulating him on his birthday. And it was like he got the best present he could get because Athalia was dead. And he's like, I wish the police would just move on and leave this alone. And he's smiling broadly. Yeah, I mean, like, the editor of the paper did not like Athalia. There was evidence. I talked to a former reporter, Anne Haywood of the and Philip Whitley of the St. Augustine Record, and she said she remembered a day when Athalia came in trying to do some research on Alan because they were both at each other's throats. The editor told her he didn't have anything and she left in a huff or something. And the editor did not like her of the St. Augustine Record, did not like her at all, and was a fan of Alan. So that's where that stupid article came from. Yeah. And then my other favorite was obnoxious victim had no shortage of possible killers.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. I'm trying to thumb through the book really quick and see if I think I came across one of them. I don't know if this is the one that we were talking about, but yeah, I've got these right here.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if that's the one that we were talking of, but I was trying to flip through it really quick and see if I could find one of these, but yeah, it's just, I could not believe it, and that's something, I teach a journalism class here at the high school and we have a newspaper and I don't know, I wanted to talk to them about this because I feel like he did have an all-star lawyer and
he did.
Yeah, and
great lawyer.
I think that was great for him, but I just feel like that public opinion was already swayed by the press. I just feel, and I just want to bring this as an example of how powerful our words are as writers, as journalists. I mean, really as people, especially in a small town like ours, we can start gossip pretty quick. Can't we, Crockett? We can start it pretty quick here, but I don't know. Do you feel like that this is a lesson in the power of the press, or would you give more credit to Edward Booth? Would you give more credit to Booth, or would you give more credit to the power of the press?
A good question. I know that the lady who wrote those stupid articles, one of the ladies who, I forget her name, Jack something, I got in touch with her and she refused to have any comment whatsoever on the murder. She said that what all she had to say about it during that period of time. So I guess she never changed her opinion. And by the way, she was very close friends with the Stanfords.
Yeah.
So, obviously the press is powerful. Although nowadays, I wonder, with all this fake news baloney going on, if anyone really believes trusted sources of journalistic integrity. And I believe they're still out there, but the St. Augustine Record clearly was not one of them.
Yeah.
And I don't think, even if the press had been more sympathetic towards Athalia, I don't think they would have convicted Alan. I really don't. I think it would have taken a change of venue for that because they weren't going to convict one of their own.
Yeah.
However, afterwards, he was persona non grata, and that's why he moved. Afterwards, he thought he'd get his old job back.
Yeah.
And so he moved. And then I heard from a lady who was friends with Patty Stanford when they moved to South Carolina. And she said they were living in really reduced circumstances. And then Patty died and he remarried a more prosperous woman.
Well, that was the next question I had on the notes was he seemed to be a part of like the good old boy network, Alan Stanford did. But like you said, after the case is over and he's acquitted, he kind of was turned into an outcast in a sense. Do you feel like that this is almost like a tribal justice in a way? You know, they really didn't like Athalia, so we're going to turn a blind eye to that. However, you are guilty to us, and therefore we're going to outcast you from society.
Yeah, and I think Frances Bemis's murder might have contributed to that as well. Although I really don't think Alan killed her.
Okay.
Although he could have. I mean, the FBI was investigating him for that murder, but I don't think he did it. I talked to Frances's neighbor, the artist, and she said she thought it was a guy in the apartment house that Frances owned who did it. So
I think
they knew he did it. They knew he did it. Everyone knew it. It was obvious, except to him, you know, that they knew. It was just they disliked her so much and what she represented. And he was one of their own. They're like, how could the usher at Trinity Episcopal be convicted of murder? How could someone who lived in a big house on Marine Street be convicted of murder? How could a Southern gentleman from Atlanta with this, you know, all of our values be convicted? So yeah, it definitely was tribal. Yeah. But they knew it was clear. The prosecutors did this much. They made it clear to everyone that he did it. And he was acquitted because of the politics and the tribal judgment, but they all knew he did it. It was obvious.
You were talking about his marriage with Patty. There was one quote. It was when she first got brought into the police to be questioned. It wasn't at trial or anything like that, but the way that her quote was presented, I remember reading that thinking, this sounds very rehearsed, very robotic, you know, like almost maybe she had been coached. Like, this is what we're going to say, which I'm just speculating. But I just didn't know what you thought about their marriage post-trial, if maybe this was something that weighed on her conscience, or, you know, I know that I put in the notes, I'm sure that any ordeal like this would be strain on a marriage, you know, but I just didn't know what you thought about it post-acquittal.
I had a lot of sympathy for the daughter, for Patricia, because I think she saw something, maybe not the whole thing. Maybe her mother blocked her, and she certainly suspected. She went and talked to Locke afterwards and said, what did you see? And he goes, I don't know. It could have been anyone. It could have been your daddy. It could have been my daddy. Although his daddy was not even in town. So I think he was trying to let her down easily. But Patty, the wife, how could she stay with him? I've often wondered that. And apparently, you know, I've talked to her friends. Her friends liked her, you know, a lot. They said she was a really nice person. And there was some speculation that they separated. They moved from St. Augustine to Miami for a while. He worked somewhere. And there was some speculation that they separated. But when they moved to South Carolina, they were together, and he's buried next to her. So I don't know, but maybe divorce would have been too shameful in those days. Maybe, I don't really know, because financially she could have left him. Her father left her $200,000, which in the 1980s was a lot of money. But she decided instead of leaving Alan to leave it to her daughters. and then he tried to steal it.
Yes, yeah, which I think really spoke to his character, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, Crockett and I did a podcast over The Great Gatsby, and we talked about would Daisy and Tom or Gatsby and Daisy stay together, and we came to the conclusion that, of course, Daisy and Tom are going to stay together because we have to keep up appearances. And you were talking about Southern society. I wonder if that was maybe at that time period, you know, part of that, of them staying together.
That's a good point, because if she had left him, people would have really known that he was guilty. Not that they anyway, but it would have, and it would have created even more notoriety, I think. So you're probably right. It was probably appearances that made her stay with him, because if she left him, people would know he, for sure he was guilty. Because everyone's like, how? In fact, some people actually said that. They said, I don't think Patty would have stayed with him if he was guilty. So
you've talked about Frances Bemis, which I think her death is strange also. You know, a lot of the things that I have read and listened to have said that some people speculate she might have had a book about Athalia's murder, maybe implicating Alan Stanford. I didn't know if there was like any record of that or if that was just pure speculation. And also, I didn't know what your thoughts were about Frances Bemis's murder.
I liked her so much. I met her niece and her nephew-in-law. Lovely, lovely people. They live on St. George Street in St. Augustine. And she adored her aunt. In fact, they were very close. And I remember her husband, Arthur, said, Frances said to me that she thought she knew she had an eyewitness to the murder. And I wish I had done more. I didn't do anything. I was really busy with my new job. And I have always felt guilty that I didn't pay more attention to what she said, because they believed Alan had killed her. But I don't. And the police didn't, because Alan, he wasn't as smart as Athalia, but he was not stupid. And Frances was going around saying, I have an eyewitness who saw it and he's going to come forward. I think she was talking about Locke, because Locke's family was all like, no, don't finger Alan. Don't testify against him. It's too dangerous. I think that was who Frances was probably talking about. And that's why, Locke's family was so alarmed and didn't want him to testify. But I really don't think that's who killed her. I think it was, I don't know who it was, but people have said it could have been one of her people who roomed in her apartment house. She went for a walk every evening and they saw an opportunity and killed her. But of course, the story would be even more lurid if Alan had killed her. But no one really knows. The FBI did investigate it, but never came to any conclusion. However, the crime scene was maintained.
Yeah.
Like Athalia.
I've got a few questions, I guess, left here. The first thing I going back to my wife and I guess coming back to present day, one thing we love about St. Augustine is everyone there is always so nice to us. I think that they can tell that we are tourists, but when we were walking Marine Street this past summer, there were people out there doing yard work, and I was thinking they have to know that we're tourists. They have to know that we're not from here. But they were still just, hey, how are you doing? Are you guys enjoying your day? Things like that. We stopped and talked. One lady was trimming her hedge and she just almost carried on a conversation with us. And I don't know, it just, the whole circumstance around Athalia, we were talking about the civil rights things that happened there. I'm thinking of the picture. This I'm want to think that this happened in St. Augustine, where the man's pouring the acid in the pool, right? And the African Americans are in the pool and he's pouring the acid.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking about things like that and Athalia's murder, how they ostracized her. And I just have a hard time, I guess, coming to grips with that, because it's like I said, for us, St. Augustine has really become a home away from home. Everyone's been so friendly, and I don't know. I just didn't know if you thought that this was kind of a turning point for this community, or you were talking about how there's some similarities still. I just didn't know what your thoughts were about this case in relation to modern St. Augustine.
Well, that's a good question. One thing I want to point out is that the business community is pretty young.
Yeah.
Is compared to other, tourist places or big cities or what have you, or towns. A lot of the business owners went to Flagler College and didn't want to leave and started a business, because what else are they going to do in St. August?
Well, we go to an ice cream shop every year called The Scoop. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's in Uptown, and the girls that run it, I think, are in their early 20s, but they remember us. We come in every year and they're like, "Hey, welcome back." Like, we don't have to say anything, I just, so anyways, continue.
Well, it's true. It's a younger business community, and I think that helps a lot, because younger people tend to be more tolerant and, open-minded and educated even. So there's that. But as far as what happened in St. Augustine, you said it's such a friendly town, and you can't equate that with what happened to Athalia. There's always some people who are not like that.
Right.
And Frances wasn't like that. She marched with civil rights protesters. Jinx, well, I don't know about Jinx. He was kind of a hothead. But there were other people in that community who were fair-minded, and she did have friends. I mean, she had some very close friends. So it's not like everyone was against her, but a lot of people were. And I just think the community has changed a bit. There's still the old guard. One of the people who I interviewed says the old guard doesn't die out, they just reproduce, and that's true to an extent. My friends in St. Augustine, they yearn for the old days when it was less crowded and there were less people around. But I do think the youthful aspect of St. Augustine has changed it for the better.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, not that. Oh, and there's also a guy named Dr. Michael Butler, I think it is, who teaches at Flagler College, who is he's a white guy, but he's like a civil rights expert. He does a show. Heard him. I went to a seminar of his, and I've heard him speak. And he does something called the Magnificent Drama, which is the whole history of civil rights in St. Augustine. And so there's people like him, and he lectures with the Historical Society and in other places, raising awareness of equality and justice and history. So maybe there's more people like that nowadays than there were then.
Yeah. I feel like St. Augustine is a smaller town. The town that's north of us that I mentioned, Cookeville, St. Augustine is smaller than Cookeville,
Yeah.
And so I guess for us living in, like I said, a small town in the South, I understand the old guard and the upper politics type thing going on there. So, but I don't know, that's interesting. You talk about the young businesses and things like that. I that's something I'm thinking, I'm kind of running through my mind of all the places that I've been. And yeah, you're right. There's a lot of young people running those businesses. So,
well, and some of them were family businesses where the people took over. There's a few. I'm trying to remember the chocolate place. That's been a family business for a long time, but I think the kids run it now.
Okay.
So you're not going to run this whole podcast. It's great.
I told him I'm just his wingman for this. It's always just really refreshing to get to talk to other English teachers
I
from
know.
backgrounds and corners. And I know I keep bringing up the English teacher bit, but Do you have any advice for our young upcoming writers? I know Drew had that on one of our questions here, and it's one that, we share a lot of writers in common. Do you have any good advice for our young up and coming writers, kids who may want to be journalistic, kids who may want to write fiction, kids who may have no interest in writing whatsoever?
I taught writing for college and creative writing a lot when I was a teacher. And I was amazed how many kids love to write. A lot of them really, really love to write. And you give them, you know, let them off the leash and they're going to go crazy. But of course, they have to learn the fundamentals too. So I tell them, if you want to be professional, you can't turn in papers with bad punctuation, or awkward phrases or ending in prepositions or things like that, which they don't really seem to care that much about. But for what I tell them, two things. Read Stephen King's book on writing. Have you read that?
I have. I love that.
I've read a lot of books on writing. That is the best one. And I think kids can relate to that. I would even assign it to them if I could. Because what he says is true. You have to write every day. And if you don't write every day, the door is going to close. And what I would always do with my writing classes was the first 5 or 10 minutes, we would do what I called a free write. Our classes were like an hour and 40 minutes long. I don't know. How long are yours?
About that long. We've got 85 minutes or 90 minutes.
Okay. So we spend the first 10 minutes doing free writing. You know what that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And that seemed to, a lot of them who even weren't into writing loved it. And then we'd share a little bit, not with everyone, but just share a little bit. And I thought that was helpful too. And also giving them a range of topics to write on, and letting them pick topics. Sometimes I would say, you give me, your cues, and we'll use some of those. And that helped a lot too. Do you do those things? I bet you do.
I do. Yeah, I'm sure Drew does as well.
Mm-hmm. That's what seemed to be helpful to me. And also to tell them you have to read a lot, because a lot of kids who love to write have not been introduced to the pleasures of young adult fiction.
Yeah.
I think is another good way to get them started. My daughter, I was so mad at her middle school teacher, because I'm like, what is all this young adult stuff? Where's Shakespeare? Where's Zora Neale Hurston? Where's this, that, and the other? But I'll tell you what, she became a big reader, and later on, she read all that heavier stuff. So
that's great advice. Thank you.
You were talking about writing every day, that Stephen King mentioned that. And I know that I have talked to students because I like to put what I'm reading on the board because it's stimulated a lot of conversation about reading. And they ask me, how do you read so much? And I try to tell them, to me, reading and writing is like running. I have to start somewhere. I can't expect to just go full out to begin with. But one thing I want to ask is, you were talking about writing every day, and I've told you that I've been trying to write a little bit this summer, but I have 3 kids who are under the age of 7, and it's been really difficult for me to write every day. But when you were going through this, like, did you say, I'm going to at least write for 10 minutes a day, or did you have like a time limit, or was it just like, I'm just going to do this? Or, because I know that Stephen King, I think, mentions, 2,000 words a day or something like that.
Oh,
so
ridiculously optimistic.
Right. I know.
Books that can understand it.
Mm-hmm.
They're all like 1,000 pages long.
Yeah.
What I got my advice from an Orlando Sentinel reporter who I had come in to speak to my writing students, my journalism students. His name was Jeff Kuhner. And he said, get up early every morning and write. Even, if you don't get much done, just do it. It gets you in the habit. And I'm like, I'm a high school teacher. My day starts at 6:40.
Right. Yeah.
What time does school start for you guys?
We start at 8, but we have to be here at 7:45, but I try to be here about 7:15, really, somewhere around there. So
school every day at 6:40, and school started at like 7:15.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but I said, "Are you crazy?" He goes, "I'm telling you." So I every day of my high school teaching career, I got up at about 4:30 in the morning and wrote for an hour before I got ready for school. And I'll tell you, that's how I got my books done
Oh,
too.
that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing I'm going to have to get over too is I've tried to write at night because that's when our kids, I feel like that's the only time that I get is like later at night, you know. But a couple times I'd been sitting there and my wife would come and look over my shoulder and I would be like, and like close the computer down really quick. You know, I think I'm going to have to get over that just a little bit.
No, I tell my husband always wants to read what I'm writing before I said, no, it's not ready. I'll let you, when it's ready, you can read it.
Yeah.
And he still doesn't understand that, uh, but yeah, I'm a morning person.
Mm.
Are you a morning or a night person?
I used to be a morning person. I used to get up. I tried to get up between 5 and 5:30 every morning because usually my kids would sleep until like 7ish or so.
Yeah.
And we had our third daughter, and she was going through a period where she was sleeping in the bed with us a little bit, you know. And I would get up at 5:30 and she was like Dracula. She would just kind of raise up with me. And so, and so I got to where I wasn't getting anything done because I was having to, which I don't mind, but I was having to hold a kid and fix a bottle and turn on what is it, Sophia the First or whatever. So, you know, so I've kind of turned into late night now, you know, so.
I cannot write at night. I mean, I have to be on a really severe deadline to write at night. So mornings are always best for me. But I do remember on weekends when I try to write in the morning and I'd have, the kids shrieking and carrying on. So I just, learned to write through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
No, I completely understand. I completely understand with that.
You're a booty head.
Yes. That's so funny. I've got here, you've written other books. You talked about your Ghosts of St. Augustine in St. Johns County. I know when I go into secondhand bookstore and look at the local authors, it seems like everything that they've written is set in St. Augustine. Man, I can't think of the author that I got Jason and I a book with this past summer when I was in St. Augustine. He's written a few. I know that they say that he sets up at the amphitheater at the I guess the farmers market that they have there. I can't think of his name right now, but anyways, I think all of his books are set in St. Augustine. But anyways, what do you think it is about St. Augustine that's so magnetic? You know, I know that I'm really attracted to St. Augustine. What do you think it is about St. Augustine that attracts us to it, and those living there seem to be proud of it because they want to write about it, you know? So what do you think it is about St. Augustine?
Well, it's the oldest continuously occupied city in the United States. Not under U.S. rule the whole time, but, going back to 1565.
Yeah.
That's part of it. The other part, I think, is that, and I've talked to people who've said this, it looks like a European village.
Yeah.
It's got the cobblestone streets, the little narrow alleyways. I mean, you feel like you're in Europe here. And I think that's very attractive to a lot of people. And, the Spanish and English background is, fascinating. And the Minorcans and all that is just fascinating. So there's so much, the old Spanish houses are still there. So many of them. And, you can tell right away because they're like right up to the curb if they're house, and I just think people are really drawn to that. One other thing, every time we go, we see couples. And so I think it's a great couples destination, especially, even if you're starting to date, who's going to say no to an outing at St. Augustine? Of course they're going to go. And I think a lot of romances bloom that way. And then, of course, my husband and I have been married for 30 years, and we go all the time. We love it. And you go. So why do you go?
Well, it's funny you talk about romance. My wife and I got married oh my gosh, 11 or 12 years ago now. And we honeymooned in Palm Beach Shores, and we were coming back home, and we were both like, let's stop in St. Augustine and see what this place is about. And we just fell in love with it. It's just, I don't know. I think it's so unique and kind of quirky in a good way, and you were talking about the European look to it. I'm thinking about my favorite drive in St. Augustine is we'll go to Saltwater Cowboys. Have you ever been there?
No.
It's over on St. Augustine Beach. It's really delicious. It's on like the marsh side of things.
What's the name again?
It's called Saltwater Cowboys.
Oh, we'll look into that.
Yeah, it's pretty good, but we usually will come back and the sun's setting and we're crossing the Bridge of Lions and the lights it's so pretty. It's so pretty.
Oh God, you've got to go on that Freedom schooner. Have you ever been on that?
Oh no. Huh?
There's a family that's operated this, I think it's a 60-foot boat, a schooner, 2-mast double rigged schooner it's the only ride on the intercoastal, other than the pirate ship, the first one though. And they'll take you out for a sunset cruise on the bay, on Matanza Bay. And my husband took me there on my birthday a couple years ago. And it was the pictures we got are unbelievable.
The pirate ship, Sonny, my son loves pirates, and I've got to get him on that pirate ship. This is just an irrelevant story, but we were, the A1A Ale House used to be up there at the corner. I don't know if you know where O.C. White's is. It's really close to O.C. White's, but anyways. We come off the elevator and there was a man dressed up in a pirate suit, and my son went, and he looked at him and went, "Yar." It was so funny. But yeah, it's just a great town. I love it. I'm sorry to your friends who are tired of the tourists.
Yeah.
We love it. Crockett, do you got anything else?
No, this has been wonderful.
Yeah. Well, you wanted to talk about your website and your other 2 books. So do you care to say anything about that?
My website is elizabethrandallauthor.com, and all my books are on there. You can order them on there, except for my latest one, Hating Harlan, which is a fiction book, but you can get that on Amazon. That's like a dark comedy set in the 1980s. And then we wrote a book for St. Augustine buffs. We wrote a book called Secret St. Augustine that came out about a year ago. And it's about all the cool places in St. Augustine you may not know about, or the cool places you know about, but there are certain things you don't know about them. So we had a lot of fun writing that book, except we researched it mostly in the summer, and it was so hot.
Oh yeah, it is hot. Yeah. I think that's one thing I love about St. Augustine too, is because, we've gotten to where we really know our way around town. I told my wife I felt like Nick Carraway because I was in secondhand bookstore and these people were asking for a place to eat lunch, and the lady at the desk said, she mentioned the Columbia, and they turned and looked at me and they said, "Do you know how to get to the Columbia?" And I was like, "Oh, they're asking me for directions now. I'm a local." They're like, "Yeah." But anyways, the more we explore, we just keep finding out more stuff and more cool places, and this year we stayed a block from the college on the back side. And that was just so eye-opening because I had never been on that side of the college, and I was I think my daughter and I would eat ice cream at the plaza in the college every day. So I don't know. It's just really cool. Well, I really appreciate it.
Okay. Well, it was so nice meeting you guys. I wish I taught at the same school, because it sounds like your English department is great.
Oh, it would have been a dream to be able to work with you. This is great.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And I enjoyed it.
Hey, if you're a fan of good conversations and fresh takes on literature and the kind of school stories that stick with you long after the bell rings, well, I've got a podcast for you. It's called With Honors, and it's where my high school students have taken the microphone, not just to analyze books or talk about our lessons, but to reflect on what we've learned this year, have conversations about what surprised them, how our literature and classroom experiences connect to their real lives. And we talk about everything from symbolism and Poe to the pros and cons of class pets, and all through the voices of smart, curious students who have learned to speak their minds. New episodes drop regularly every week, and everyone is a snapshot of what it looks like when students take ownership of their own learning and have a little fun while they're at it. You can find With Honors on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and our YouTube channel, so check them out.